Welcome, friends. It's Mike Williams. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Ofer Zeevy. Ofer is a writer from Israel, and he is in the process of finishing his book on the McCartney and Beatles conspiracy. Ofer explained that the topic of Paul is dead is relatively unknown in Israel, and his book, which he expects to be released within the next few months, will be introducing the topic to inquiring minds in Ofer's country. And I was honored that some of my research will be included in Ofer's book. We did not intend for our discussion to become an interview, but because we covered so much ground, I thought my audience would enjoy the talk. Before we get into the interview, I would like to thank everyone for their continued support, especially my patrons on Patreon, and with a special shout out to Martin C. And so without further ado, here's the discussion with Ofer, and thanks for listening.
So I really wanted to thank you for your time, and I know you probably get tons of emails and requests, and I really appreciate it. And I have to be frank, you woke me up. It's as simple as that. I think the turning point was the December 18, the Grand Illusion video, which I saw many times since then. And in fact, I didn't see it on December 18th. In February of 2019, I was in London, and I bought, this was the first book I bought, which I know you're familiar with. It's the Nick Colostorm book. And then I started reading it, and I grew up on the rumor also that Paul is dead and everything. And then there was, he started talking about memoirs. And then I said, okay, I will try to buy memoirs. And there was already the new version. And then I started seeing your videos, and everything just came together. And I still couldn't believe it. I mean, when I started reading memoirs, every page I'm turning and saying, no, this cannot be real. I started connecting the dots, and I think the Grand Illusion presentation, your presentation from December 2019, really sped up the process. I mean, you really brought in all the major pieces of information, and I started looking into that. And since then, I'm researching. That's what I do. And I wanted to share with you a couple of things before we go to the questions, if that's okay. Something very, very strange happened to me as I started writing my book on March of this year, March, April, and then May. And as I wrote, and I'm writing in Hebrew, my screen would go black several times. I don't want to get too paranoid, but it never happened to me. I write a lot, and I have other things that I do. And this is the only time that my screen went black for a few minutes, then it came back. And then in June or July, when I got Billy's back, which of course you have too, one of the things I'm asking and I'm discussing in my book is, did the controllers succeed in achieving their goals? Okay, and I'm bringing my perspective. All of a sudden, when I opened this book, and I read it several times already, on page 82, in the footnotes, there's, and I can quote, on the bottom paragraph on page 82, many people wonder if the NWO will succeed. And I get a full explanation on stuff that I wrote about in my book. Now, again, I don't know if I'm too paranoid. That's a possibility. But it's really this paragraph, and I read it several times. It answers a lot of my questions. And this book isn't even published yet. It's just a draft. I'm writing it on my computer. So this is one thing I wanted to share with you. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it's nothing. But I deal in the book not only with story number 1, which is PID, but with the greater story, which is story number 2, who's behind it, what are the goals, a lot of stuff that you are discussing in your work. Okay, So this is one thing I wanted to share with you. And the second thing, I happen to check your Facebook page every day and your YouTube channel. And about 2 months ago, you shared a video. I don't remember the name of the person, but he was discussing the Henry Kissinger article from Wall Street Journal on April 3rd. If you read this article, signed by Henry Kissinger on the Wall Street Journal, which is like, it's after Washington Post and the New York Times, I think it's number 3 daily newspaper paper in the USA. He says that, and this was April 3rd, it's like 4 or 6 weeks into the pandemic. Okay. So in this article, he talks about that the world needs a new order, says it plain and clear. He says that we need to, no country, not even the USA, can in a purely national effort overcome the virus, and we need a global collaborative vision and program. He talks about the effects of the impending chaos, and then he goes to say we need a liberal new world order. And then a few sentences later, he talks about enlightenment values, priorities must be established. Now, you and I know that Henry Kissinger appears on the list of this guy, John Coleman.
Yes.
Page 284. Now, Henry Kissinger is 97 years old. He was, if you recall, the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State in the Nixon and Ford administrations. He's very controversial. If you just check the Wikipedia on Henry Kissinger in terms of his involvement in world affairs and everything, but I could not believe that on the Wall Street Journal of all places on April 3rd, he's preparing us.
Yes.
Directly. He writes about it.
I've run across so many articles like that, not just with Henry Kissinger speaking, but there's all of these internationalist organizations like the World Economic Forum as an example. And if you just go to their page and you take a look at what they're publishing on their site, like I did a video last night, and in that video I said they're not hiding anymore. They're telling us point blank what's going on, what's on the horizon, and what the end game looks like. And I find the World Economic Forum's website to be absolutely fascinating because, like I said, they do videos. There are papers up there that they write. And if you read that stuff, you can see there's a blueprint, and they're following that plan step by step. So for people who think that this stuff is not going on, or that the New World Order or the internationalist structure is not already in place, they've got a lot of homework to do, a lot of catching up to do.
So this is something I wanted to share with you. Now I wanted to go over the questions if you have them in front of you.
Yes, I have them.
And I would really like to know what's your opinion, because you lead on this subject. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I really learned a lot from you. Question number 1 about the mainstream media not even mentioning it, the PID story, and my question is, do you think that is it because it's controlled? And I know you think the media is controlled, or the story is so far-fetched that they couldn't believe that Bill Shepard replaced Paul McCartney?
Well, the media is completely controlled, Ofer, and based upon my McCartney and Beatles work and all the other work I've done that has nothing to do with the Beatles, we know that there is this grand deception that's in place. So the media is there to deceive us, to lie to us, to create an artificial reality, and to feed us that narrative. I did a presentation in South Carolina about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I quoted George Harrison's song from his Brainwashed album. It's called Any Road. And the quote is, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there."
I know this song, yes. And I saw your presentation, by the way.
that's basically it in a nutshell. So the deception is in place, Ofer, in order to be able to lead the masses, to control them. There's a destination down the road, and they are manipulating the reality, and the media is one of their biggest tools in their toolbox to be able to do that. And so the Beatles story is one of the largest psychological operations in modern time because music is very powerful to human beings. People resonate with music, and it's a Luciferian agenda. It's an agenda that goes back before the 1960s. I would say that it really started as far as the direction that the Beatles picked up on with the Beat Poets from the 1950s. And the Beatles music and the Beatles themselves were put together in order to drive massive social engineering, to take the world, not just the United States, not just the West, because it really has gone beyond that, to take the world out of its old paradigm, or what the controllers would consider an archaic old paradigm, where there was traditional values and institutionalized religion was too structured. It kept people too boxed in. So in the minds of the people that are running the show, their belief is there needs to be more freedom, there needs to be more exploration, there needs to be more experimentation, and almost to the point where what they're telling us is anything goes. So if it feels good, do it. And in fact, that was a tagline that was used back in the 1960s and 1970s, right? If it feels good, do it. So it's really a no-holds-bar approach to living your life. So they think that they're going to take us to a better place where there's more openness, there's more freedom, there's no borders. Basically, if you want to get their ideology down in a song, listen to John Lennon's Imagine. Lennon's Imagine is the New World Order anthem. And if you go back and listen to that song and you see what's played out since that song was released, you're seeing a lot of stuff come to fruition. The Beatles were and are, they still are, a massive psychological operation. They have influenced a massive amount of pop music and pop culture. It still goes on today. If you watch any documentary on other bands or on the music industry, almost always there is some mention of the Beatles. Whether verbally, they'll talk about the influence of the Beatles on that particular band or their songwriting, or what you'll see in the background is Beatle posters, Beatle albums. So it's always there. So the reason why the media doesn't talk about it is because the media is part of the massive psychological operation that takes place on any given day. So they're not going to go out and say, oh, by the way, the Beatles were manufactured, as Davy Jones called them, the first manufactured band. They were created by Tavistock. Oh, by the way, they didn't write really any of their music between 1962 and 1966, and they didn't write a lot of the music between 67 and 70 either. So they're not going to say this because people worship their musicians. They worship their bands. They worship their celebrities. And that worship adds fuel and energy to their agenda. Because as long as you're worshiping something, you're prone to follow. So as an example, if the bands are telling you through their documentaries and their lifestyles that drugs, alcohol, overindulgence in sex is great, and you worship that band, you worship Led Zeppelin, you worship Kiss, you worship the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, whatever, then it creates a mindset within people that says, you know what? Hey, it's good for them. Be good for me. Look at them. They're famous. They're on TV. They make a lot of money. So it's a complete alteration of the reality that people used to live. And today, because now it's 60 years later, because the Beatles came onto the scene in 1962, so we'll just round it to 60 years, most of this stuff has become acceptable as far as lifestyle goes, as far as morals and ethics go. It's just accepted. It is now so interwoven into the fabric of society and into the culture that nobody's really questioning it anymore. So that's why they don't talk about it, because the Beatles, again, were a massive psychological operation, and since the media is in the business of promoting psychological operations, they're not going to touch it.
Yes, very much. You were talking about anything goes. I remember, I'm 55 years old, by the way, and I remember sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This was the anthem of the 60s, the 70s. By the way, I lived in the USA for 1 year in 1979 in Miami Beach, Florida. And both of my degrees are from New York. I lived in Queens, New York between 86 and 92.
Okay.
So I'm very much familiar with the American culture, and so I know what you're talking about.
I lived in Queens too, Ofer.
Where?
I was in Jackson Heights.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't very far from Shea Stadium.
I live in Flushing.
Flushing,
which is
okay.
not far away from Shea and the tennis courts. And
yeah, we were very close.
What years?
I was there from, 1982 through 1985, 86. And then I moved to New Jersey.
Yeah. In 1989, there was a special radio show, 20 years to the rumor of Paul is dead.
Yeah.
On one of the two, I think it was WNEW FM, which is one of the rock stations there. But it was, we had no information. You can't compare it to what we have today. So anyway, moving to question number 2. This is something I get from people I talk to here. There's so many books about the Beatles. How can you take one book, the memoirs, which annuls everything else? It's a complete opposite. And I tell them, listen, there's old information, which is controlled, and now there's new information. And if you don't believe memoirs, there are other sources where you can check it. I checked the I'm a Phony video series. I found a lot of stuff there. By the way, my conclusion is that it is coming from Billy or one of the people working for Billy. And I know that because there are outtakes from the anthology that only he and Neil Aspinall, who is dead by now, have access to. So there are other sources. There are other places to look for. And, but they can't believe it. It's a totally new, line of information. So it's very difficult to convince people who are not looking into the new information.
Yeah. Well, it's thought that Neil Aspinall was behind I Am a Phony. He was the main source of the information that was going out. And of course, Billy had to be involved in it if Aspinall was involved in it. And then when Neil died, the information was still coming. But if you notice today, if you go to the I Am a Phony YouTube channel, it's really slowed down a lot. Right now, it seems like it's kind of in a holding pattern.
I noticed that they did an HD version in the last 2-3 years for almost all of the existing Rotten Apple series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's no new information, as you say, but they are investing in at least making it look better or something.
Yeah.
But and I noticed also that they deleted some of the the series is between 1 to 90. I think from 90 to 100 they deleted the last 10 or something. So maybe the information there was too revealing, or I don't know.
Or maybe they're going to rework it. To me, right now, they are kind of in a holding pattern from the perspective of brand new information or revelations coming out. I used to go to I Am a Phony too. I learned a lot from them. And, one of the things that I wanted to do with my work was to not have the information as cryptic as I Am a Phony. Where you have the flashing images and you got to slow things down and you have to try to piece it all together.
Yes.
So when I did my work, I wanted to put a more layman's view out where it wasn't as difficult to decode what was going on, especially from the occult perspective. Because when you watch the I Am a Phony videos, there is a lot of occulted information that's coming through about the Beatles and about Billy, but it can be very, very difficult to break it down and really connect the dots and understand it. So, one of the things that I wanted to do was to make it more understandable. And I think I did that. I get a lot of comments and emails from people saying, thanks, I understand this a lot better now. But anyway, to answer your question about, how can memoirs trump all these other sources, I get that question a lot too. But what people don't understand is that, as I've mentioned before, Ofer, the Beatles were and still are a huge psychological operation. So the psychological operation did not just entail creating the Beatles and creating the music. That's not what the psychological operation was limited to. When they create a psyop, they have to build and create the narrative all around it, right? So the same people that gave us the Beatles and gave us the music and all that stuff are the same people, it's Tavistock, that created the narrative. They had to build the backstory, and they own the media, and all of this information was disseminated. So the way it works is there's two categories of people. There's two camps, I should say. There's the camp that is on the Tavistock payroll or the controller's payroll, and they are in place to ensure that the official story is disseminated. So they write books, they make films, they make documentaries, they do comic books and all that stuff. So that's what they're there to do. So you've got that whole machine going. Then you have the second camp, Ofer. The second camp are people who are not on the payroll, and they are authors, filmmakers, but the mistake that they make is they rely on the fabricated narrative as their source documentation. So if they're going to write a book about John Lennon and Paul McCartney's childhood, which I personally believe is nothing like the official story that they've given us, then what's going to happen is they're going to go back to these fabricated narratives, and they're going to use them as their source reference, and they're going to build upon it. And that's actually the beauty of how complex and how brilliant the psychological operation is. They have people perpetuating the fiction, the myth, every day. It's not just them having their people on the payroll doing this, but they've got people not on their payroll who are exponentially disseminating the fictional narrative. And it's not just with the Beatles. I mean, it's with everything. As an example, so in the truth community, we know that 9/11 was an inside job, that it wasn't 19 hijackers with box cutters, right? And that Building 7 was taken down. It was a controlled demolition. But people will come and say, well, what are you talking about? Look at all these books that were written about 9/11 and written about these terrorists and Osama bin Laden, and Dick Cheney wrote a book, and Donald Rumsfeld wrote a book, and this person wrote a book, and this documentary was done. And look at the NIST report, Mike. It's like 1,000 pages deep, and it talks about Building 7 and how it was brought down by fires and so on. Well, we know that that story is complete fiction. It's a lie. Yet, it's well documented, Ofer. But it's a well documented lie. It's the same thing with the JFK assassination. I did interviews with two researchers, Robert Morningstar and Oli Damigard, both of whom have researched deeply the JFK assassination. And guess what? Lee Harvey Oswald didn't fire a shot. There were 4 or 5 paid assassins that fired at the same time and took JFK out. Yet, the JFK assassination is well documented that the lone shooter, gunman, was Lee Harvey Oswald.
There's a video which we've seen thousands of times.
Right.
So it must be true.
It must be true. So that's the thing. So people fall into the trap of believing that because there's information, there's books, there's films, there's documentaries on a particular topic, that because that stuff exists and you're told that that's the story, that's the thing, right? everybody just accepts what they're told. Nobody does any research, or very few people do research. A very, very small percentage of the population gets off their butts and actually digs in to try to understand and do some critical thinking. Everybody else just absorbs whatever it is told to them through the television set. So when people come back to me and say, well, how can memoirs be this? How can memoirs be that? Well, those are some of the examples that I give them. And by the way, the guy that's telling you the story is the guy playing the part. I've always said, Ofer, that if Billy got up and tomorrow he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on the mainstream news and I'm going to announce that I am not Paul McCartney. My name is Billy Shears, and I've been playing this part since at least 1966, and this is who I am. Most of the population wouldn't believe him. They would reject him. They would say, oh, he's just pulling a prank. It's just a joke. No, he's Paul McCartney. I don't know, maybe he's just getting old and he's losing his mind. This is the kind of stuff that would come back. People don't want to give up their worship. They don't want to give up their idols. Because certain parts of their life, certain parts of their personality, their emotional state, their memories have been built upon that story. The Beatles, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, and so on. I had a laugh when Lennon's 80th birthday came up and all of these radio stations and there were some YouTube channels that were talking about what a great guy John Lennon was. Now, I'm not saying John Lennon didn't have a lot of very positive things to say as far as peace and all of that, but there was a part of Lennon that was not good.
Neglected his first child.
Right. Julian and Cynthia Lennon, his first wife, did an interview, one that I heard that she did with Alex Belfield, where she talks about how Lennon was abusive to her. So, and I'm not trying to crap on John, but the thing is, people don't want to know that stuff. People only want to grab onto the feel-good stuff. And the feel-good stuff is what comes out of the television set. It comes out of the books that are written and the films and the documentaries. But that's why it's important that we dig in and we seek truth and we learn more about the reality so that we can pick apart fact from fiction.
Now, question number 3, you're a guitar player. By the way, I watched part of the anthology today again, because in Billy's Back, on page 283, if you can open it for a second.
Yeah.
On the top paragraph, Billy is inviting us to watch the Beatles Anthology 7, 15 minutes into, it's actually minute 49. I watched it this morning.
Yeah, I have that clip.
And he is playing right-handed. I mean, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I watched the anthology in the past. So we have a reminder from Billy's Back.
Yeah. So there's two schools of thought on that because, Billy does tell us that, and he actually told us that in memoirs. And so some people will say, no, they flipped the video. He was playing lefty and then, they flipped it. But the point that people miss is whether Billy was actually playing right-handed or they flipped the video. In either case, there was a message being sent. That was a clue. In the book, he's telling you, I'm right-handed.
Yes.
In the book, he's pointing you to the DVD.
Yes.
Okay? So when they did Anthology and they filmed it, they were perfectly aware that that snippet, that segment of video with Billy in India, he was playing right-handed. So either way, whether they flipped the video to make it look like he's playing right-handed or he was actually playing right-handed, in my view, that's irrelevant. Because when they put the DVD together, they knew what they were showing everybody. It was a clue.
Yes.
It did not just slip in there. Anything that people are picking up on, including myself, is because it was put out there. It was intentionally put out there. It's like the clip, it was the concert for George, where Olivia Harrison
Hello, Billy.
Greets Billy and says, hello, Billy. Right? So was that a slip-up? That wasn't a slip-up. That was put out there intentionally so that people who are intrepid and looking and awake would say, well, wait a minute, with all these other people there, called him Billy. And not only that, but standing right next to Billy was his wife at the time, Heather Mills.
Yes.
So if Olivia Harrison is saying hello, Billy, and Heather is standing no more than 3 feet from both of them,
Yeah.
she knows he's Billy. Some people want to argue that she thought she married Paul McCartney, and the reason why the marriage broke up was because she found out he was an imposter. And I always said no. She knew she married Billy, and that video, in my view, proves it.
So in terms of right-handed, left-handed, the clues are there for us. But you said your version is that he was right-handed always, and he had to learn
Yes,
to play left-handed. That's what he's telling us in the book.
that is what he's telling us in the book. So, yeah, so it's, it's not an easy thing to do. Now, it's not to say that it can't be done. There are people in Beatles tribute bands who play the McCartney part who were originally right-handed and then had to teach themselves how to play left-handed. So it can be done, but it is not easy. And usually what happens is the right-handed guitar player, even if they can get themselves to the point where they're playing adequately left-handed, are never as good a guitar player or bass player than when they're playing right-handed. And in Memoirs, Billy tells us that when he records, he plays right-handed.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So we're going to see videos of him in the recording studio, like in Give My Regards to Broad Street, the movie he did where he's, he was in the recording studio and he's playing lefty. Yes, but that's all staged stuff.
Let It Be, he always plays lefty, I
He
think.
plays lefty, right. But what people don't see is when the actual song is recorded, we don't see the version of the song that was the final recording, which way he was playing. So, and the thing is, Billy over the years obviously has become very adept at playing his bass left-handed. But one of the knocks that he took when he went solo with Wings as an example, and he was touring, there were a number of musicians and music critics that had come out in various magazines and newspapers and said that his bass playing wasn't as complex as what was being played on his recordings. I remember reading that a number of times back in the 1970s and the 1980s. And my answer to that is because, well, when Billy's playing out, he has to play left-handed, and he's not as good a guitar or bass player left-handed. He's good now, but he's not as good as when he plays right-handed. So when you hear his records, you're hearing him play right-handed. That's why it sounds better. And I guess we can get into this a little later, but when we go back to the 1962-1966 period, the bass playing you're hearing there is not biological Paul McCartney.
Yes, of course.
Right? So people are hearing this bass playing on these songs, and they're like, wow, it's tremendous bass playing. And on many of those songs, the bass playing is very good. But the thing is, the Beatles didn't play on those records. And we'll get into that, I guess, a little later. They sang just like the Monkees did.
Yes.
So, yeah, switching from right-handed to left-handed is difficult, Ofer. I've tried it a couple of times. I basically gave up. But then again, I didn't have a motivation to have to do it, whereas Billy did, right? But it can be done. So it's not something that's out of the realm of possibility.
You saw him in a concert.
Yeah.
Because I remember you reviewed it about 2 summers ago, something like that. And he played left-handed, but of course, but he also had other, I think, bass players in his band.
Yeah, no, he played, when he played bass, he played alone, so he did fine. And with guitar, this is what I noticed. His voice is shot. He just cannot sing like he used to. And Billy's 83 now, so I'm going to cut him some slack. But what I noticed, Ofer, was that when he was singing, they actually lowered his lead vocal, and they had the other guys on stage complimenting his melody when he was singing. In other words, so they had a blending in of the voices so that it would help to camouflage the fact that Billy's voice isn't as good as it used to be. Because in his heyday, he had an unbelievable voice. I mean, he really did. He had tremendous range, but he doesn't have that now. So nobody was covering for him when he was playing instrumentally. He was on the piano, bass, guitar. He did great. But his vocals, they're nowhere where they used to be.
Okay, so question number 4. In Memoirs, we learned that the American moon landing was faked. 9/11 was an inside job. Now, my question is, what what was Billy's motivation in stating that in the book? Is he trying to show us that he knows what goes on behind the scenes? Or is he hinting just how dangerous the elites are? Or is he trying to tell us that more things are not real with regards to major world events? And there's another possibility, maybe if he says that he's Illuminati, maybe he's more close to the actual behind the scenes than we think of. I know it's a scary thing to say, but he said all of this, he says with conviction. I mean, the moon landing was fake and 9/11 was an inside job.
Yeah, he even says that it was his relatives that were involved in 9/11.
He was in the airport.
Yeah, he was supposed to be on the tarmac, and he said he saw the whole thing. And he also mentions that.
What was he doing in the airport?
Yeah, colossal timing, right? And he says that his relatives were involved in the planning of 9/11. So he was pointing back to the Bushes, and I believe specifically he was pointing back to Barbara Bush, where it's highly suspected that she is the daughter of Aleister Crowley.
Yes, I've heard that. Yes.
Right. And so, Billy tells us in memoirs, well, I don't want to say he tells us, but he strongly alludes to the fact that he has ties back to Aleister Crowley. I believe at the very least it's definitely bloodline ties. And some folks that I'm connected into have done work on that. And the answer is yea, verily. He is bloodline related to Aleister Crowley. The question becomes whether Crowley is actually his father. It's very possible because Crowley was involved in a lot of sex magic. And Billy was born in 37, and Crowley died in 47 at the age of 72. So he would have been 62. Crowley would have been 62.
They shared 10 years on Earth, from 37 to 47. I found out on Wikipedia, but it's really nothing, that Crowley had a son born on May of 1937.
Yeah.
Out of wedlock. His name is Rendell Jair. That's what Wikipedia tells us. But we know that Billy was born on September of 37, so it's not even close. So
no, Wikipedia is very dicey and it's very sketchy. Ofer, what they put information up there that they want you to see. Anything they don't want you to see doesn't make it up there. And the other thing is, no one really knows how many children Aleister Crowley actually fathered.
Yes.
Nobody knows that. So the 4 or 5 children that they list on Wikipedia, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, it's not helpful at all. In my view, it's not anywhere near the truth.
Yes.
Right. So that's why it takes a lot of additional digging to figure out who's who in this whole equation. Because I had this conversation with Tom about Billy divulging information like the moon landings and 9/11 being an inside job and all that. So Tom and I converse via email or PM, and we're not pen pals. We connect periodically to kind of cover a couple of things, especially if I'm working on something that has to do with the book or the McCartney conspiracy. So the explanation is that Billy is opening the aperture because we're in a time right now of revelation. We're in a period of time where truths are being revealed and deceptions are being exposed. The way it was explained to me is that the book is giving the reader, those that are intrepid, a glimpse into the inner circle. That's what Billy's trying to do. He's not letting you in completely, obviously, but for those people that are awake, for those people who are seeking truth, he's opening the door a little bit and said, you want to take a peek inside? Because I'll do that for you. I can't let you live here, but I can open the door enough so you can take a look at what's behind me. So it's part of this whole process of awakening, Ofer. My reading of memoirs and then my subsequent journey of proving it or disproving it, because that's really what it was all about. When I first read memoirs, I was like you. I was like, this is unbelievable. I can't even, well, I don't want to say I can't, but it was a voice inside of me that said, I don't want to believe this stuff because I was such a Beatle freak. But the information in the book made me look in places that I would never have looked before to broaden my horizons as far as my own personal awakening. I mean, for instance, I did some research and was generally aware of the occulted aspects of the world and the reality. But it wasn't until I read memoirs that I really started to dig in. So I really wanted to learn more about Aleister Crowley. So I read books on Crowley. And I read books on Luciferianism because I wanted to understand what this was all about. Because in our reality, it tells us, don't read that stuff. Don't look at that stuff. But how are you going to really understand the truth if you don't look at the things that the fake reality is telling you not to look at?
Yes.
If the current reality, which I think is imploding in on itself, is telling you not to look at something, I'm thinking, I need to go look at that. You see?
Yes.
So there's a domino effect, and that's what happens. And that's what, memoirs did for me. It was a domino effect, and, I cover a lot of information that is not in memoirs.
Yes.
I mean, my whole presentation that had to do with whether the Beatles wrote all their own music didn't come out of memoirs. Billy hints at it very, very subtly on page 350 and 351 in the Blue Book, very subtly. And you really have to be on the ball to pick up on it. Otherwise, you'll just read it and move through it, right? Because he's basically saying that George Martin took their little songs and he made big stuff out of it. And then he talks about the Committee of 300. He talks about the snitch and all that stuff. So if you don't know who John Coleman is, and you don't know about his book, The Conspirators' Hierarchy, the Committee of 300, it goes right over your head. So it doesn't mean anything. So that's why, to me, memoirs is very important. And the one thing I do want to touch on, going back to question 2 for 1 second, Ofer.
Okay.
A lot of people in the community will say that memoirs is fiction, right? They'll say, oh, it's fiction, it's not true, it's made up, it's this and it's that. But the folks that are saying this, what they don't realize is that any book written on the McCartney conspiracy, Paul is dead, has fiction in it. And what do I mean by that? If the person who is saying this, calling memoirs fiction, believes in the official narrative that the Beatles were organic, they were discovered by a small record store owner who was pushing their tapes and then ended up at EMI under the tutelage of George Martin, and then achieved worldwide fame and became the greatest band in the world, well, that story is myth. That's a fictional account. That did not happen. The Beatles were never organic. Brian Epstein was a Freemason, and he was heavily, heavily tied into the network, as was George Martin, who later became Sir George Martin. Sir means service to the crown. And so when people believe the official narrative and they build upon it, the foundation, the very foundation of what you're building upon is flawed because it's not true. So that's I really want to cover that because it's amazing to me that how people who consider themselves to be truth seekers and researchers, they themselves have self-imposed boundaries. There are areas and space that they won't venture into because in their minds, it's a sacred cow. It's what they want to believe. And because they want to believe it, they're just going to hold on to it no matter what. And then when people like myself come along and say, you know what, that story's not true.
You are the bad guy.
I'm the bad guy. It sends them into a tailspin. And that's why I've had a lot of ad hominem attacks on me. A lot of people trying to go for the jugular. And for what reason? Think about it. Because I'm one guy who turned around and said, that story, based upon my research, is not true.
Yes.
So what's happening is even people who are allegedly truth seekers, they have paradigms. And they don't want their paradigms screwed with. That's not truth seeking. It's not.
So we were talking about bloodline.
Yes.
Going back to question number 4. And you said that we are in a time where there's some revelation.
Yes.
They're letting us in somewhat. Not on the full picture. We don't get the full picture, but we can take a peek or something like that.
Think of it, Ofer, as an initiation that we are going through that helps us to pierce the veil, to push back the curtain so that we can see the great Oz. And again, this is a small sliver of the population.
Very small.
Most of the population, no matter how much information you give them on any given topic to show that that's not true, they won't see it, they don't want to hear it, they will go along their merry way and live in the virtual reality. Whereas people like yourself, me, and others, we're seeing a completely different reality. In fact, I tell people there are two different realities that have emerged now. There's the one that you and I experience and know about, and then there's the one that, well, I used to live in and exist in. I don't anymore, but it's a place where most of the population resides. Two different mindsets, two different realities.
Question number 5, your brand illusion presentation. Sometimes at the beginning, you show the pyramid of power, the Freemasons pyramid of power, the 4 levels,
yes,
if you recall. And I think 1 or 2 slides after that, you move to talk about all of the famous rock musicians that you and I grew up on and how they became OBE, MBE. And I'm thinking it's the same structure. There's a pyramid here, and Mike is showing me another pyramid, which the Queen set out, and she's giving every year OBEs, MBEs, etc. But I'm looking at the structure, and Mike is showing me the same structure. There's a pyramid, Freemason's pyramid, but you never made a direct connection.
I did. I presented the generic pyramid where I show the 3 segments of the pyramid. There's the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry at the base. Then we have 13 degrees of the Illuminati in the middle, and then 20 degrees of unknown beings at the very top. So that's 20 plus 13 plus 33 is the 66 degrees.
You have Lucifer on top.
Lucifer at the top, right.
Okay.
And this comes from memoirs. So Billy
Yes.
tells us about the structure of the pyramid, which I think it's in the chapter called
Masonic
Checkmate.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that information alone is stunning, that information would be put out there. And to be told that at the top of the pyramid is Lucifer. Billy even refers to our world as the fallen world in the book. So he's giving us a lot of insight into, what this world is all about and how it's structured. Now, within the pyramid, there are pyramids within the pyramid. And so when we look at the Queen and she hands out the OBEs and the MBEs and the knighthoods,
Yes.
that's embedded inside of the pyramid. So as an example, the people who are receiving OBEs and MBEs and so on, for the most part, are in the 33 degrees at the bottom of the pyramid, the Masonic structure, the structure of secret societies. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
I know that there are some exceptions to people who are not in secret societies. I've had some conversations with folks who receive the lower level MBE, but with my research, what I have found, especially when I'm looking at musicians and entertainers, they're all part of secret societies. So what I was showing was, okay, we have this pyramid of 66 degrees, and then within the pyramid, there are rewards. There's a hierarchy of recognition, and the Queen will reward people, certain people, who have contributed to varying degrees to the service to the crown. They're in support of, and they're doing what they consider to be yeoman's work in support of the overall pyramid.
Okay.
Think about all of the famous musicians, all of the famous entertainers, celebrities. If I look at the music world, because I've spent a lot of time looking at the music industry, all of the very famous, these people are all bloodlined, secret societies, parents who are in the military, intelligence. So what that says is that the cards are stacked. So if you're well connected, bloodline-wise, as Billy is, and many others in the music business, then the number of opportunities available to you is tremendous. You still have to earn it because within the pyramid there's still competition. That's the thing people have to also understand. It's no different than a corporate structure. So it's like if you work for Exxon, as an example, you still have to vie for position, for promotions, salary increases, and all that stuff. But anybody who doesn't work for Exxon does not have access to those opportunities. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the pyramid operates as its own corporate structure, if you will. So that's why people who don't belong or don't reside inside the pyramid, they could have success, but they only have success because the pyramid decided to bring them in and to leverage their skills and talent. But there's a ceiling. In other words, they'll only get so far as their fame and their money. What they won't have available to them are the rungs on the ladder that the people who were born and bred, bloodlined inside that pyramid, that they have available to them. Hopefully that made sense.
Yes. Okay, question number 6. I guess we already know the answer. I mean, you talked about it a lot. If Billy was groomed, somebody had to move in order to let him in. So I guess you agree that Paul's death was premeditated, basically. I mean, there's no other way to understand it.
Well, according to memoirs, Paul and John entered into a satanic pact.
In Sweden, yes.
In October of 1963, right?
Yes.
So just based upon the fact that there was a Faustian bargain, a deal with the devil, that would say that it's premeditated. Because when that pact was completed, that ritual, they knew that McCartney, biological Paul McCartney, was going to have a limited shelf life as far as his time here on Earth. So it had to be premeditated. But the thing is, the way they work it is, these premeditated deaths that are the result of going to the crossroads are always made to look like accidents. Always. So people ask me that, they'll say, well, so-and-so died this way. How is that a ritual? I mean, you're watching too many movies. You're thinking that they're going to drive a stake through their heart. It's not the way it works. So the life gets truncated, or the death comes sooner than it should, or would have, if they didn't have their life script rewritten by Lucifer. It comes in the form of what appears to be an accident. So the story goes that biological Paul McCartney died in a car accident. Now, some people want to argue and say, oh, he didn't die in a car accident. It doesn't matter. He died. And all the clues do point to a car accident. In fact, in one interview I did with Wrestling with the Future, Angelo, who was the host, used to work at a club in New Jersey. And Southside Johnny had come in with Denny Lane. And there was a band that was playing that night. So when Denny came in with Southside Johnny, they sat down at a table. And Denny was telling the story that, yeah, biological Paul McCartney is dead, and he did die in a car crash. That lends credence to the story that we're told. And like I said, there's a lot of clues that points to a car crash. But again, it's viewed as an accident. Even though in this case, they didn't tell us that he died. They're pretending that, Billy is Paul. But if we take a look at Jimi Hendrix, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, we're told that he died drowning in his pool. I watched a documentary on Brian Jones, and an ex-girlfriend of his is still investigating it because she said that Brian was a very good swimmer. And she couldn't see any way that Brian Jones would drown in his own pool. You've got Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain.
We have 2 sources that say that a guy by the name of Frank Thorogood drowned him in the pool. One of them is memoirs, and the other one, there was an article in 2017 in one of the English dailies that a guy is going to do a documentary on Brian Jones, and it was stated that Frank Thorogood did drown. That's what they found. So we have 2 sources that tell us that he was actually murdered, he didn't drown by himself.
Right. So, and we have lots of examples like that. When Kurt Cobain was found dead, the way the gun was positioned and the way the body was positioned, the detectives came in and they were looking at it and they're like, this guy didn't commit suicide. There's no way, the way where the gun is, where his body is, and so on, that's what happened. But you know what happens is these stories get squelched.
Yes.
The other thing that a lot of folks don't realize is the tentacles of this octopus is far-reaching. They can put the kibosh over on anything they wish to. We don't want that out. It's not going out. Plain and simple. And anybody who continues to talk about it, you better shut your mouth, because if you don't, you could wind up with a big problem yourself. So, unfortunately, this is the reality of how a lot of this stuff works. But, again, a lot of people don't know about it, so it goes right over their head.
I want to move to question number 7. You had several shows with Mark Devlin from the UK. On one of them, he told you that he went to see a presentation by Mark Lewison, and then he went backstage after the presentation, and he asked him, why are you not talking about the Paul is dead rumor? And Mark Lewison just waved him off. He says, it's nonsense, don't even ask me. Now, I remember this because Mark Lewison is like the official, biographer or whatever, and he's working on his huge 3 parts books about the story of the Beatles. Now, book number 1 is out. And book number 2, which is going to cover 1962 to 1966, he said, and I saw it in one of his in a video interview, he's delaying it at least until 2023 because his research is huge and he keeps collecting information. He goes over daily newspapers every day from this time period. It takes just a lot of time. But I'm asking myself, is he going to cross over to the new information? Or are we still, whenever the second book will come out, are we still going to get the same old version? And then we have this comment on page 13 of Memoirs when Billy talks about February 21st, 2023. I don't know what's going to happen on this date. Supposedly it's the end of the road from him, or the end of touring. So I just wanted to ask you what, if you have any information about what's going to happen in 2023. What do you think? Are we still in the process of having the old narrative and the new narrative? Just, it's like 2 parallel lines that never meet. What's your take on that?
I think, Ofer, that, well, first of all, let me say, I don't know what's going to happen on February 21st, 2023. I did read that in the book as well. But it could be that that's the time or the date in which Billy's off the hook as far as his pact.
Okay.
Right? In other words, he doesn't have to tour anymore. He doesn't have to make any more records and so on. I don't know. I really don't know. I am of the school of thought that, because some people think, oh, maybe that's when he's going to pass away. I don't know about that because, Billy keeps telling us about the 6s and the 9s. And when he plays Paul McCartney, he's the 9s, and when he's himself, he's the 6s. So I'm thinking that he's going to be with us until he's 90 years old, just like Chuck Berry lived to 90 years old. So that'll take us out to 2027. So I don't know what that date means. I do not think that we're going to get anything from mainstream sources, that includes people who have written books, that will go off the road and talk about anything other than the mainstream narrative, as long as Billy is alive.
Okay.
Because Billy has told us in the book, and also in conversations, email conversations, correspondences I've had with Tom, that the full disclosure doesn't happen until after Billy passes away. And what we don't know is how soon after Billy passes away. We have no idea. Could it be a week later? Maybe. I doubt it. Could it be a year, 2, 3, 5 years later? Probably. They're probably going to wait a bit of time. Now, going back to what I was saying before, we have 2 camps of people organizations or whatever that generate information. There's that camp that actually is part of the machine itself, part of the operation, that is responsible for putting the mainstream narrative out there. And then we have that other camp which relies on the mainstream narrative in which to do their research, investigation, and build upon. So people ask me a lot about Mark Lewison, and I will stay neutral on it. And the reason why, Ofer, is because I have no idea which camp Mark is in. I really don't. And I'm not going to make any accusations. I'm not going to get into that. It's just not my thing. So all I can say is this. We have those two camps. These are two camps that my research has identified, and it's I think pretty easy to understand those two pillars. And the other thing I will point to is that Rubber Soul, the 30 days to write, record, rehearse, arrange, and wrap up Rubber Soul, 16 songs, that narrative is fiction. That didn't happen. So, my opinion, my perspective, any book, any documentary, anything that's written that is trying to tell us that the Beatles themselves walked in on October 11th with no material and left the studio on November 11th, 11/11 by the way, in 30 days, wrote, rehearsed, recorded, arranged, and mixed down 16 songs in that 1 month period of time. That story is a fictional account. So if you're going to put material out that's going to try to tell us that the Beatles wrote music without having a backlog and knocked out 16 pretty much top shelf songs in that period of time, I personally don't put any stock in that narrative. Zero. And, and because I did the work, I believe, to prove that that story is not true, any vehicle that tries to tell me it is true, I'm not going to believe it. It's the same thing, like we're going to talk about it later. It's the same thing with Please Please Me. That's another unbelievable accounting of the Beatles story. The other one is that, going back to my presentation, there was the Mercy Beat article from 1962, which clearly tells us that the songs that the Beatles are going to record at EMI in London were written for them, specifically for them, and given to them by their recording manager, their producer, George Martin. How do you get around that? The story that the Beatles wrote 30-plus songs while in India, when Ringo was gone in 2 weeks, Billy was gone by week 3 or 4, and only George and John stayed for 2 months, while they were supposed to be meditating and doing other activities while they were there. That's another story that is just loaded up with holes, and it's not believable. And then there's the Escher tapes, demos, some people will pronounce it Escher, where we're told that the Beatles recorded 27 demos in one day, in a single day, in May of 1968, leading up to the White Album sessions.
Yes.
That's not believable either. That's not believable. So we have the Mercy Beat article, we have Rubber Soul, we have the India story, and we have the Escher demo story. Those 4 things by themselves are not believable. So if somebody's going to try to write something or document something and tell us that those things actually happened, like I said, this is just Mike. I'm not buying it.
I want to give you another thing which I think you just touched on in one of your videos. The Revolver album number 7,
yes,
which came out in early August 1966. Immediately after the release of Revolver to the market, and the double A side single, which is Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine, the Beatles went on their last tour.
Right.
In America. 19 shows in 17 days or 17 shows in 19 days. It's all documented. Now, if you check the website, setlist.com, and you check the song list on each and every day of the tour, they didn't play even one song from Revolver.
That's right.
Now, you've been to many concerts, I've been to many concerts. When a band issues a new album, and they go on tour, they play the songs from the album.
That's right.
Okay? Not even that. You can say to me, it's impossible to play Eleanor Rigby live. I get it. You have to have violins, you have to have... Okay. But Yellow Submarine, why not play Yellow Submarine? The single was out at the beginning of August. Radio started playing it. The people who went to the concert, they got the 11 song set or the 12 song set with songs from 1964, 1965, mostly rock and roll.
Right. Some of them going back to With the Beatles, the second album.
Nothing from Revolver. That tells me that the notion that all of the music was pre-recorded is true.
Yes.
Why not promote your own album and your own single? You want people to go to the stores and buy them. Radio plays them. Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine, they shot up the charts, the American chart, the UK chart. It doesn't make sense.
No, it makes no sense.
Makes sense is that the Beatles didn't know how to play the songs because they only contributed the voices to the taping, to the recording of the Revolver songs. It's right there.
Right. So with Revolver, it was the same thing with Rubber Soul. They did not play on the record. They came in to do the vocals only. That's it. That was the model. See, I recommend to people, Ofer, that they watch the documentary The Wrecking Crew.
Yes.
If you watch The Wrecking Crew, a light bulb should go off because that was the model in the 1960s and 1970s as to how all pop music was recorded. The Wrecking Crew was a group, a loose group of studio musicians that played on an incredible amount of albums for a very, very large number of popular artists. As an example, the Beach Boys and Pet Sounds. That wasn't the Beach Boys playing on Pet Sounds. That was the Wrecking Crew. And the Beach Boys came in and they sang the vocals. So that was the model. So the Beatles had the same exact model put in place. The same exact model. Maybe it wasn't the Wrecking Crew. Maybe some members of the Wrecking Crew did play on their music. We know that Bernard Purdie has come out since the 1970s, right through 2014 when he wrote his book, and he has a chapter dedicated to the Ringo Starr controversy, where he says that he was hired to play on 21 Beatle tracks in the early days, and he was paid by Brian Epstein.
Yes.
I've had somebody step forth that is very close to Ronnie Verrill. Ronnie's dead now. It's a family connection, if you will. And they told me when I came out with my documentary, Did the Beatles Write All Their Own Music? They said, well, now that the cat's out of the bag, Mike, I just want to let you know that Ronnie said that he played on Beatles songs as a drummer. And then the official story tells us that Andy White played on two, Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You.
Yes.
But my argument is those are the two that they're telling us about. I believe Andy White played on
more,
a lot
yes,
of the early Beatle music. So from a drummer perspective, we have Andy White, we have Bernard Purdie, and we have Ronnie Verrill. In fact, Purdie came out in his interviews and said that Ringo played on none of the early stuff.
Wow.
And I interpreted that as 1962 through 1966. I believe that Vic Flick, great studio musician, he was with the George Martin Orchestra. I believe that it's very possible that Vic was doing a lot of the guitar playing on those early Beatle records. Another person that we can bring into the mix could be Jimmy Page.
Yes.
Page has been a studio musician since he was 17 years old. And in fact, when Page had his lecture at Oxford University going back a few years ago, what did he tell us? He told us that Ringo wasn't the drummer on the early songs.
And Paul was dead.
And Paul was dead. Yes. And he said, Paul is dead. And it's the way he worded it. It was masterfully speaking. So, I'm glad that we're talking about this because you're absolutely right. When they left the recording sessions for Revolver and immediately went out on tour, they couldn't play Taxman. They couldn't play Yellow Submarine.
Exactly.
No songs from Revolver were played. And you're exactly right, Ofer. And the reason for that is because they did not have the time to learn the songs. They weren't taught the songs yet. People will come to me sometimes and send me links. And they will say, hey, Mike, listen, I don't know. The Beatles are recording this song. See, they're in the studio. We have an audio of them playing a song and there's different takes and all this stuff. That proves that they were playing on those early records. No, it doesn't prove that at all. All it proves is there's an audio of them playing or strumming to a particular song. That's all it proves. And my argument is this. The Beatles did have to be taught some of the songs so that they could take them out on the road. So they had to learn them. So what you're actually hearing is a recording of them rehearsing the songs that they were practicing so that they can add it to the song list and play it live. The other thing that you could be hearing is it's all staged. In other words, the psychological operation, as we know, as I've already said, is huge. They covered every angle, every aspect of it. So what makes someone think that they wouldn't turn on the studio recording to capture them doing this and doing that, practicing harmonies, strumming the guitar, playing the song? Well, it was done so that there is a library of audio that people would listen to and then make the leap of faith and say they recorded on the album. Unless we have hard evidence, proof, and I don't mean somebody's book, and I don't mean some audio track off of YouTube, of them in the studio with George Martin recording the actual song that wound up, in other words, the actual recording that wound up on the albums, then you've got nothing. Because all the other proof, I believe, points us to the fact that they did not record on those albums through 60 through to 66. And the other thing, Ofer, I did an analysis that I'm going to be putting a video out. I don't know when. It's going to take some time. But I went through all of the Beatles songs from 1962 through 1966. And there were 77 originals on the albums, plus they had songs that were not on the albums. Right? They were singles that were released. So when you add the 77 album tracks to I think it was 12 singles that they recorded that weren't on the original 7 albums, you have like 89 songs. We'll round it, we'll say 90.
Okay.
When I went back and looked at the song lists through the years, what I noticed was the Beatles only played 25% of the 90 songs. Do you see what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is, of the 90 songs that are credited to Lennon and McCartney as originals, whether on albums or singles, they only played 20 to 25 of those songs in concert.
Yes.
And that's because those are, we'll use the number 25, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That's because those are the 25 songs they learned. Those are the 25 songs they were taught to go take out on the road. And then we have something like 60 songs that were never touched whenever they played live and in concert. So I think that speaks volumes too. Why were the same songs played repeatedly over that 4-year period of time? Rock and roll music, twist and shout.
Yes, the covers. Yes.
They did a lot of stuff like that along with the quote-unquote original tunes. So this is all stuff that, a lot of people have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around because it's mind-boggling because the narrative that's out there is so overwhelmingly powerful because it's something that's been drilled into our heads since day one. If we're music aficionados, right? It's something that we have been ingrained with.
When I lived in the States, I went to see the Cars. I saw Foreigner. I saw the Police. And it was always people were waiting for the new songs because a new album just came out. And this is what they played. This is a no-brainer for us. You've been to many concerts yourself, I assume.
Yes.
So to see that the new album, the 7th album, they're supposed to be better musicians now. Revolver is coming out, and it's an album with huge songs. And they don't even play one song.
Right.
In any of the concerts on the American tour in August of 1966. And they don't even play the single, Yellow Submarine. Okay, Eleanor Rigby, okay. We can leave it out. It's supposedly, they could have played, an acoustic version or whatever. But this is amazing. It's all there. The information is out. You just have to take the information and figure out what's going on. I mean, this is what you've done with Rubber Soul, with other albums. And I wrote to you, and this brings me to question number 8 about the one of the revelation on Billy's back. And you know that Billy and Jimmy Fraser and Bill Shepherd wrote, "I Want to Hold Your Hand." Now, what I found out, I was trying to reach the information about Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots. Now, if you check Amazon, there is a CD which compiles all of the recordings from both of their albums. And I'm checking the song list of Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots CD, which you can buy on Amazon. And I see, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," "She Loves You," "Please Please Me," and I saw her standing there. Now, the only question is, and I really don't know, and we know that the original albums were taken off the market. You can find them. But there is the CD. Now, the only question is, did they record these songs before they gave them to the Beatles, to George Martin? Or the information that we are presented with is that they are covers. They covered the songs after the Beatles supposedly wrote them and recorded them. Question mark. I think I know what the answer is, but I want to know what your opinion is on this.
Yeah, so that's page 256 of Billy's Back, right?
Exactly. He only talks about "I Want to Hold Your Hand" because I think he doesn't want to reveal more about more songs that he wrote and gave to George Martin. That's my assumption, okay?
Yeah, so the footnote is on page 256, folks, of Billy's Back, the new book, the blue book. And so this paragraph says this: William, meaning Billy, recycled the phrase, "I get high," from "I Want to Hold Your Hand," which was one of the first of many songs written for the Beatles and credited to Lennon-McCartney. At the start, protecting their wholesome starter image and keeping the song from being banned by the BBC, the phrase was muffled by a light overdub of the phrase, "I can't hide." Many who did not know the official lyrics misheard the true lyrics. Others received that covert drug reference as subliminal programming that would not be activated until the Beatles overtly repeated that message. As Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pots covered "I Want to Hold Your Hand" on Mercy Mania in 1964, the line is, "It's such a feeling that my love, I got high, I got high, I got high." So what's implied there is that if the original lyric was "I got high," and if the Beatles version was "I can't hide," then what Billy's telling us is there was a version of that song before the Beatles had the song, which means there was a version of that song before, quote unquote, Lennon and McCartney wrote it.
Exactly.
And what he's telling us is very clearly there that the song was credited to Lennon and McCartney. That song was written for the Beatles, and I think what Billy's telling us is that he and Jimmy Fraser, or maybe just Billy himself, wrote that song. And it became a demo for the Beatles to learn, right? Because that's what we're told in memoirs, that the Beatles had to learn, especially in Billy's Back. I mean, there's so much information in the footnotes.
Yes.
That they had to learn these songs. And so how were they going to learn them? They had to be learned by George Martin bringing in a copy of the song. I mean, George Martin wasn't going to hum it to them, right? They had to have a recorded version of the song. So it's very possible that what Billy's telling us is that Billy and the Pepper Pots, those songs in those albums were actually the songs that were given to the Beatles to learn and to cover as they went out to do their concerts. We know they didn't play them in the studio because they were not studio-level musicians.
Yes.
Very interesting passage. I'm glad you brought it up because I do believe Billy is giving us a huge, huge truth drop in that footnote. At least Tom is giving us the truth drop in that footnote via Billy.
A lot of the new information on the footnotes on Billy's Back is synchronized with your April 1st presentation.
Yes.
It's basically a confirmation. That's how I read it.
Yes, and what people should understand is because detractors want to say that I work for Billy, I'm working with Tom, None of that stuff is true. Absolutely false. Not true. So what happened was I was working on that documentary. Did the Beatles write all their own music, Ofer, as you know, because you followed the channel?
Yes.
It took me a long time to get through that. And I would do updates every once in a while, and I would explain to folks that the reason why it was delayed was because of the magnitude of the information I was going through. It was tremendous. And I had to be able to stitch it together so it made sense. I had to build the storyboard. You just couldn't slap it up there, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. So I was doing that. Tom knew that I was working on something that had to do with the music. What happened was I was watching this DVD, Deconstructing the Beatles, and it was presenting the timeline for Rubber Soul, and I got 15, 20 minutes into the DVD, and I said, that didn't happen. As a musician, as somebody who has been in recording studios, for somebody who has my own home recording studio right to my right here, understanding how songwriting works, how arranging works, and all that stuff, I knew that the official story wasn't true. Unbeknownst to me, what was happening, Tom was updating Billy's back.
Yes.
Okay, so what was happening was I was doing my thing and Tom was doing his thing, but I wasn't sharing with him my information because I wouldn't do that. And Tom obviously would not share his information with me because he can't do that. And so when I released my presentation on April 1st of 2020, and I picked April Fool's Day intentionally because it has to do with the occult, that's why I did it. Because when I picked April 1st, I knew that if Billy's watching the channel, which I know he does, my website, which points to my YouTube channel, is mentioned in both Memoirs and Billy's Back,
Yes.
he would get it. I wasn't releasing it on that date for the general public to kind of figure it out. That was my way of relaying a message back to Billy. So what happened was I sent Tom a link to the video, maybe a day or two before I actually uploaded it. And he got back to me after watching it. It took a few days because it is 4.5 hours long. And Tom said to me, I think you're going to be very pleased with what's in the update to Billy's Back. And I still had no idea what that meant. And so I wound up buying Billy's Back. And of course, I was going to read it. Ofer, I was pleased, but I was also amazed at what was revealed in the footnotes in Billy's Back about the music. I know you read this.
Yes.
In the footnote, Tom tells us that Theodore Adorno was writing the music, involved in the music. Now, my take on it is I don't think Theodore Adorno wrote all of the music, because Adorno was a very busy man with his books and his lecturing and all that stuff. But I do believe that Theodore Adorno, working with George Martin, they were managing the whole psychological operation from a songwriting perspective, from a recording perspective, from an arrangement perspective. That's what they were doing. And I think they had a small kludge of songwriters that were working for them, that were generating these songs and putting them out. In fact, one person that was on the team when I did the presentation, very accomplished musician. So I can't say who this person is, very accomplished. And had said to me that they analyzed the music between 1962 and 66, especially the later albums like Rubber Soul and Revolver, and they picked up on at least 2 different songwriting styles.
Okay.
Which means 2 different songwriters.
So we're basically seeing a pattern on the albums from 1962 to 1966.
Yes.
And then when Bill Shepherd joined the Beatles, he contributed some of the songs himself, maybe John Lennon, maybe George Harrison, but other people contributed from the outside also.
From 67 through 70,
yes.
You're saying? Yes, so from 1962 to 66, I don't believe the Beatles, John, Paul, George, wrote anything.
Okay.
I think all those songs were written for them. They were recorded by studio musicians, and they did the vocals. They had to learn, like I said, 25 of those songs to go take them out on the road. That was the 62 through 66 period. When Billy officially came into the picture from a Paul is Dead perspective, which was late 1966, and then his first project, his first album was Sgt. Pepper. He actually brought the Beatles, John, George, and Ringo, more into the recording process. even though they were not completely in on all of the recording process, because we're told in memoirs, and also there are mainstream articles which say that they say Paul McCartney, but we know it's Billy, was doing a lot of the tracks, the guitar tracks on Sgt. Pepper, which many Beatle fans believe were recorded by John Lennon and George Harrison. A lot of people believe George Harrison was playing the little lead parts in the title track of Sgt. Pepper, and it was not. It was a mainstream article that it came out, and I forgot the source. I have it written down someplace. But it comes out and says that lead guitar playing was done by Paul McCartney, which is Billy.
We know also that he drummed on some of the songs on the White Album.
Right, he drummed on Don't Pass Me By, which is supposed to be Ringo's song. So why didn't Ringo drum on his own song?
Yes.
So Billy drummed on that, and he drummed on a bunch of other songs. So I don't believe the Beatles themselves, like John and George, actually did any real songwriting until we got to the White Album.
Okay.
And you can really tell the difference in the album. The songwriting is very different. There's a lack of cohesiveness. There are great songs on it. Don't get me wrong. I love the White Album. But it's not a tightly knit album like all the albums before it, including Pepper. Pepper was all tied together. It was a concept album. The White Album wasn't a concept album. It was this mishmash of music. And a good example of where I think I could point to where there were two different songwriters that pointed to George Harrison is the song Piggies.
Okay.
On the White Album. Very classically oriented.
Yes.
And then we have the song Long, 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 which I believe George Harrison did write. It's a very slow, plodding song, but I believe he wrote that. I do not, for one moment, believe that he wrote the song Piggies. He did the vocal, that was it. And from Pepper on, Billy really replaced George Martin in many aspects. And so Billy was bringing in his own kludge of songwriters. And he was influencing to a far greater degree the production of the albums. And it wasn't until we actually get back to Abbey Road where Billy and George Martin bonded again and put out that super polished, super produced sound that we hear on Abbey Road. In memoirs and in Billy's back, Billy tells us that Donovan was a contributing songwriter, one of the contributing songwriters. Somebody else that we should look at is Emmett Rhodes. Emmett has passed now, but if you listen to Emmett's music from 1968 through 72, Emmett was only around for 4 years, but he was very prolific. If you listen to Emmett's music, it's very, very Billy, very Wing sounding.
Okay.
If you haven't listened to Emmett Rhodes, Ofer, take a listen to his music and tell me you don't hear Wings style music in Emmett's music.
I wanted to touch just a little bit on the first album. Again, what I found is, that we get a story that 11 songs, 10 for the first album, Please Please Me, and 1 which Hold Me Tight, which went to the second album. 10 songs. The other 4 songs, by the way, are the 2 singles, Please Please Me and Love Me Do, plus the B-sides, which were already recorded before. But in one day, the Beatles recorded in 13 hours, 11 songs. Now, the 13 hours is the time frame which includes breaks. The actual net time was 9 hours. That's the official narrative that we get. So 11 songs that went into the album, 10 went into Please Please Me, in 9 hours.
Yeah, it's an absolutely ridiculous narrative. It's more ridiculous than Rubber Soul. Let me just say that. Again, if we go back to the Mercy Beat magazine article, that tells us that the Beatles are flying to London to record at EMI to play songs that were specifically written for them. There's no getting around that. It's a smoking gun, that article. And then if we take that and we segue into their first album, Please Please Me, we now understand how that album was put together. The songs were written. The songs were recorded. They had to bring them in to sing the vocals. All of those songs in 9 hours. And by the way, 9 hours, 11 songs. We have 9/11 again. And then we have the Mercy Beat article explaining what it is that they were going to do when they got to EMI. So the Please Please Me album is another one of those narratives which is complete fiction.
And we're seeing the same pattern that we're given the official narrative.
Yes.
And you have to read it carefully and closely, because when you think about it, you see that it's ridiculous. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Even in the early 60s, I mean, you know that maybe recording techniques were much, lighter or simpler. That's fine. But these are top shelf songs, as you mentioned. These are songs that the Beatles George Martin promised that their music would be eternal.
Right.
And these songs, I listen to them today. They're great. There's no other way to present it. And then you're trying to think, about how they recorded them, how they practiced, the harmonies, the arrangements, the music, the lyrics. And then you get this narrative, 11 songs in 9 hours. It doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
No, it makes no sense, Ofer. And if people are open-minded and thinking critically, they will come to the realization that it doesn't make any sense. And we have to remember that the Beatles, before meeting George Martin, they were a bar and club band. They played cover music. There's the fake story out there, the fake narrative that says that the Beatles wrote 100 songs between Lennon and McCartney before they met George Martin. Yet, we have George Martin in interviews saying they had nothing.
Yes.
So, how could one narrative say that from the age of 15 until the time they met George Martin in 1962 that they wrote 100 original songs, and then we get to interviews with George Martin saying that they had nothing, that he thought their music was rubbish? These are not my words. These are the words of George Martin in these interviews. So that's what we have to keep in mind. And, the playing on those albums is studio quality music.
Yes.
Period. That is not the playing of a club and bar band that showed up and all of a sudden had their playing abilities and skills ramped up to that level of precision.
There's a very interesting comment on Billy's Back on why the Beatles failed their Decca audition. And it's that reason exactly. The demos that they presented were not good enough.
No.
And, people are saying that Decca made the worst decision in turning down the Beatles. But Decca heard 5 demos, which were not good.
Right.
So you can understand, why they turned down the Beatles.
Well, George Martin declined them too in the beginning. So George Martin came to the same conclusion as Decca, if the Decca story is real, right? Let's just say it is.
Yes.
George Martin had the exact same response. He listened to these tapes and he said, no. Now, George Martin, he's an accomplished composer.
Yes.
So he listened to this and he said no. So what Billy tells us in the book, that he got a call from upstairs. George, we can appreciate the fact that this is not what you're used to working with, but there's a bigger picture involved here. So we need you to buckle down and work this thing and make it work. And George Martin, considering the task that he had at hand and who he was as a composer, formally trained and so on, he was not going to waste his time trying to teach a bunch of young 20-year-olds who were a club and bar band how to play music. He wasn't going to sit in a studio with them and see if he can get them to do a guitar track, a bass track, or a drumming track over and over and over again until it got to the point where he thought, okay, maybe this is acceptable. That's not how the music business works. It's not, we're just going to go with what's acceptable. They go with near perfection, if not perfection. In the 1980s, if you were a drummer in a professional band, and this happened to the drummer in Chicago, the band Chicago, if you couldn't drum to a click track, you were out. Producers went and found somebody who had such precision that they could drum to a click track. And there's no way George Martin was going to waste his time trying to mentor these guys and, hug them and see what he could make of them. No, he hired studio musicians. In fact, in a clip in my documentary, and I had it in another video, we have Billy speaking with George Martin, and Billy saying that George hired Andy White. Billy's having this conversation with George, because he said to George, because you were used to studio musicians. And George says, that's right. How much clearer does it have to be for people before they start to get this? Like I said, Ofer, when I did the documentary, the truth is hidden in plain sight. If you look for it, it's there. That's why I used mainstream sources in my documentary. I really tried to stay away from memoirs. I brought it in 1 or 2 times because the mainstream sources matched up with what memoirs was telling us. But I intentionally kept memoirs out to quiet down the peanut gallery, the detractors that were just making silly accusations like Mike is just reading out of memoirs and there's no other research beyond that. Total nonsense. Absolute nonsense. So, when I released that documentary, there you go. Now you can't point to memoirs anymore. Now what are you going to do? You're going to go beat up on Rolling Stone magazine? You're going to go beat up on cheatsheet.com? You're going to beat up on Quincy Jones? Quincy's the one that said that the Beatles, they were non-playing MFers. I didn't say that. Quincy Jones said that. And not only that, but Quincy Jones told that story in that interview within the context of him working with Ringo on Ringo's own album, and Ringo could not get the drum track down. So who did Quincy call? He called Ronnie Verrill. The same Ronnie Verrill that I was told by somebody within his inner circle drummed on the Beatles music between 1962 and 1966. All we have to do is connect dots. But there's so many people out there, they don't want to connect the dots because they don't want to give up on their worship and their gods.
I have another comment about this point. I mean, people came to me and said, listen, they wrote the songs themselves, Lennon and McCartney. They practiced outside of the studio. And then they came to the studio and banged all of these songs. And I told them, it doesn't work this way. I mean, bands, singer-songwriters, whoever goes into the recording studio, they do takes and takes and takes. It doesn't work this way. I mean, first shot, 11 songs in 9 hours. I mean, each song, the first time they recorded it, it worked. It doesn't work this way. I mean, it's not real because people are trying to calculate what happened before they came into the studio, and they trust that George Martin did an excellent work, which he did afterwards. But if you judge the recording process as you explained it in your April 1st presentation, it makes sense. I mean, we can see the picture, the clear picture, and it repeats album after album. I mean, it's not a coincidence. So it's a pattern.
Yes, so I get that too, Ofer. And so what happens is people who make that statement, the Beatles were always writing, they were doing this, they were brilliant, they were geniuses, they were superhuman beings that had incredible creativity and ingenuity, and, that's how it all came together. Well, that's the fictional mythology, right? That's the myth. The truth of the matter is that the Beatles, the amount of touring they were doing in 1961, 62, 63, 1964 into 1965, left very little time when you factor in the fact that they were also in the studio recording these albums, doing the vocals, and they were doing 2 films, A Hard Day's Night and Help. They had to travel. They were on airplanes. Their tours, the way it worked was they would do 16 concerts in 16 days. So they did a 30-minute concert, got off the stage, back in a bus, back to the airport, next state, next country. You are not writing music. I've had people tell me, they were writing music when they're eating breakfast. They're writing music when they're sitting on a toilet. I'm like, you're just making stuff up. You're making stuff up. It doesn't work that way. And again, Rubber Soul is the perfect proof point, because the official narrative, what does it tell us? They had no music to speak of, no material to speak of, going into to the Rubber Soul recording sessions, which means they had to write the music then and there. So they got into the studio on October 11th and on October 12th, and they bang out Run for Your Life. So, I mean, what happened? So John Lennon got into the studio. He went and got, a cup of tea. And he said, hold on a second, let me just bang this out. Okay, got it. Next.
Lyrics, music, arrangements, everything.
Exactly.
So quickly.
It didn't happen. So when people say they were always writing, they were writing on airplanes, they were writing on buses, look, they were young guys in their 20s. They were partying. There was drugs. There was alcohol. We have an article where John Lennon was interviewed, and he said that during the filming of the movie Help, they were in a haze of marijuana, right? That the director, Richard Lester, had to actually schedule filming around when they could stand up and they weren't stoned. So if they couldn't be present for the film when they were supposed to be there, how were they writing music? You see? And that's the thing. That's why I put that into the presentation as well. Again, that's a mainstream article. That's not something that Mike made up. John Lennon is telling us, along with Ringo, because Ringo tacked onto that interview at the end and said they were stoned during the filming of Help. And some people will say, well, you know what, Mike? When you're stoned and high, you write better music. Wrong. I mean, and Ringo validates that in the anthology series when they interview him. And he said, we're talking about from Sgt. Pepper on, not the early days. And Ringo had said that when they were stoned and they recorded, they thought they did a great job. And then when they listened to the playback the next day when they were sober, he said it sounded like shit.
Yes.
That's Ringo's words, not my words. So the whole premise, that's the other thing that they sold people on, that your creativity expands when you're stoned or under the influence of drugs. That's a falsehood. That's false. You do your best work when you're clear thinking.
Well, question number 10, basically we talked about it. We get so many clues. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of clues everywhere. Lyrics, album covers, the movies, like Magical Mystery Tour, which is loaded with clues. Interviews, it's all over the place, and still people cannot get the big picture. And they say, this is circumstantial, this is, you can say that this is, you can interpret it however you want. But we know the story, we know what happened. My question is, and I'm listening to other people on from the truth community, and they say, listen, don't try to convince anyone. Just do your work, do your thinking. Look at the story, read, research, go to other sources. I mean, the energy that you have to put in trying to convince other people, maybe it's not worth it. And I wanted to hear what you think about it.
I've said for a very long time, I am not trying to convince anybody of anything. I have said that on so many shows. All I'm doing, because I like to research, is to present my research and present my findings. And if what I'm presenting resonates with you, fine. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's fine as well. Because at the end of the day, I'm doing this for myself. I enjoy doing this, and I like sharing it. That's it. And I have said on many shows, especially over the last 9 months to a year, that this is an individual journey. The Matrix, they want us to focus on collectivism. They want us to focus first and foremost on a community. And by doing that, what they're doing is they're saying, don't focus on yourself as an individual. So if you're focused on things outside of you, and if you're trying to plug into people outside of you and convince them of things or try to teach them things, and they don't want to learn, they don't want to be there because they're not there yet, they refuse to be there, then you're taking valuable time away from your own development, both from the physical perspective and also from the spiritual perspective. I've had so many comments, Ofer, and you've probably read them on my Paul is Dead channel, where people say, Mike, I tried to convince my family. I tried to convince my friend. I'm in a band. The other guys in the band think I'm crazy. I try to show them your videos. They won't listen to them, or they just scoff at it and all that stuff. And what I tell them is, The only thing that's important is that you understand. First and foremost, that you understand. And don't worry about everybody else. If at some point the light bulb goes off in their head, fantastic. But the truth of the matter is, Ofer, and we mentioned this in the beginning of our discussion, the vast majority of the population is sound asleep. They're never going to see this. And not just this, but anything you bring to their attention, anything that has obvious holes in it, that obviously doesn't stack up, and you present it to them, their programming will just reject it. The analogy I use is like trying to get a word processing application like Microsoft Word to function like Microsoft Excel, a spreadsheet. You might be able to do some things in a similar way between the two applications, but they are fundamentally two different things. One is a word processor and one is a spreadsheet. So if somebody is coded as a word processor and you're trying to convince them that they should be a spreadsheet, they're going to reject it. They're just going to say, nope, 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 I'm a word processor. That's all I want to know. I don't want to hear about your spreadsheet stuff. Go away. Those of us that are seeking truth and in the truth community and the alternative research community, that's what we bump up against all the time. So I don't waste my time on that. I have better ways to spend my time than to try to get through to people that don't want to open their eyes, that don't want to listen. I have much better things to do with my time than that. Anyway, there you go.
Okay, we have come to the last question.
11 questions. I like that too.
I swear I didn't think about it.
I know. Happens to me all the time.
It just, I tried to compile the important things that I wanted to ask him.
Yeah.
We're talking about how the music industry is controlled. And in fact, we get in memoirs, and I have also other sources, that what it means is that the charts are controlled and that radio airplay is controlled, which basically tells us that there are people higher up that decide what is going to be played, what is going to be number one, number two, number three on the charts every week. And there was an amazing story in memoirs. I follow both the British and the American charts. I have all the books, and I learned a lot about music from these books. And there was one story in 1967 when the Beatles released Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever, double A-side. And in Britain, it got to number 2 and it stayed there for 3 weeks. Number 1 was Engelbert Humperdinck. I don't know if you remember him.
Yes.
With Release Me, which is it's the music that our parents used to listen to.
Yep.
I'm not going to discredit Engelbert Humperdinck, but Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane to me is still the best quality single ever put out in the history of music, regardless of Paul is Dead and everything else. And I was puzzled. I mean, I was sure that before this single, the Beatles had 11 consecutive number ones on the UK charts. By the way, the last one was Eleanor Rigby and Yellow Submarine in the summer of 66. Now, I couldn't understand it. I was sure that the single sold a lot more copies every week than Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck, yet it stayed at number 2. And in memoirs, we finally get the solution that the controllers wanted to tell Billy, you have to work hard for us if you want to go to number 1. And this is presented as a failure. I mean, it's the first Beatles single after 11 consecutive number 1s on the UK charts that failed to reach number 1. Amazing story. I mean, again, I don't know if it's true. I assume it's true. But it shows you how the music in the 60s was controlled. And then we're told that nowadays, because of the internet and there's so many other ways for musicians to put out the music, life is easier. And I wanted to get your point of view on the state of music today in general. Is it easier to put out music and to succeed, or we're still facing or the industry is still controlled?
The industry is still controlled, Ofer, and it's easier to put music out, but it's very difficult to make money at it.
Okay.
So here's the thing. If you are signed by a major label and they want to market your stuff and they're going to sell your albums, you're going to make money. So when I say they, we're talking about the controllers. We're talking about within the music industry and the entertainment industry. It's all controlled from beginning to end, cradle to grave. So they can make you a star. They can make you a fortune. And at the same time, when they're done with you, or if you step out of line, or if you don't cooperate, they'll chop the rungs right out from underneath your feet. So you might skyrocket, and then you will hit the floor like a piano out of a second-story building. This is how it works. So the model that says, you can make a lot of money in the music industry, yes, it's still there, and that model is that you have to be within the mainstream of the music business, signed by a major label, recording studios, high-profile producers, managers, stuff like that. Now, for people like myself who are like independent musicians, yes, it's a lot easier to get our music out there. As an example, back in the late 70s and into the 1980s, I was trying to get my music sent to record labels, and I would always get the tapes back saying, we don't accept unsolicited material. Much, much smaller labels would listen, but the big labels like Capitol, RCA, all the big ones, no way. There was a formal channel in which they were procuring their resource from, and it wasn't from the outside.
Okay.
That wasn't the model, and it's still not the model today. So an independent musician like myself, we can get our music put out. My publisher is TuneCore, and you can get your music out it could be sold on Amazon. My albums are on Amazon. You can listen to the music on Spotify, Pandora, and so on. So you're going to get streaming revenue. But here's the thing. In order for you to make any money streaming, and I'll just give you an example. It varies somewhat. I'm still trying to figure out why it varies, but you'll get a penny for every 4 streams. Think about that.
Okay.
Your song streams 4 times on Spotify. They're going to pay Mike a penny. How many times does your song have to be streamed in order for you to make any money at it? You see what I'm saying?
I get it, yes.
Like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times, and that's how you're going to make money. And along with that, what's happened with a lot of independent artists, and it does happen with the bigger artists as well, but people don't pay for the music. They will look for ways to download it for free. Instead of paying the independent artist 99 cents for the song, think about that. They would rather see if they can get it for free. Again, I'm not complaining. It's just how it works. You just have to kind of roll with it. The point I'm making is they want to sell you the bag of goods that, hey, it's so much easier to get your music heard today to get it out there. Yeah, it is. But I'm not really getting paid for it. So the only time you're going to carry, home a bag of money is if you're connected into the machine and the traditional music business, which is, getting signed to a major label. And even if you get signed to a major label, they have to want to promote you.
Yes.
There's been many times bands got signed by a major label, and then the label for some reason decides that, yeah, we're not going to promote you. But you still owe them the money for being in the studio. That's the thing. They don't pay for your studio time either. You get an advance, and you have to work against that advance. And then you have to sell records, and you have to go out on tour, and you got to pay them back. So, they really have total control over this, and every genre of music that's been out there has been orchestrated and manufactured to be out there, whether it be techno, punk music, classic rock, the psychedelic era, grunge. All of these genres have played a very specific role in shaping the society and the thinking of the young people. Rap is an example. And I think Billy tells us that rap music was created in order to lower the IQ, to dumb down the public, the listeners to that music.
Yes.
Okay? That's not me saying this, folks. And he's not the only one who said this. There was a couple of other articles out there where people from the music industry stepped forward and said that rap music and hip-hop was created with the intent of dumbing down society. And you know what, Ofer? The positive aspect of this is, this stuff here, doesn't come across as very positive, obviously, right? Because we're popping a lot of bubbles and we're popping a lot of people's belief systems and stuff like that. But here's the thing. The positive aspect of this is when you do seek the truth and you do learn the truth, it is a better life. You're more enlightened. You have less fear in your life. Once you know what this is all about and how these are all psychological operations to keep you entwined in their virtual reality, into their matrix, and once you break out, it's very, very liberating. So that's my positive note. Break out and you'll be free.
And the music is still good, regardless of
Yes.
everything that goes behind the scenes.
I've always said that about the Beatles music. I get asked all the time, Mike, with all the work you've done on the Beatles music, do you still like it? Yeah, I still like it. Beatles music is what taught me to play guitar. It's what motivated me to write songs. It's what motivated me to go record songs. And the Beatles were a huge, huge part of that. Regardless of who wrote the music and who actually laid down the tracks for the recording, it's still wonderful stuff. Like you said, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. Unbelievable. I have another one for you. How about Hey Jude and Revolution?
Yeah.
Right? I played that to death when I was a kid, both sides.
I still have my singles collection, so...
So do I.
I have... I was living in New York. One day I was reading Billboard on a weekly basis, and one day in 1987, the major headline was, the record companies are going to stop releasing records. Everything is going to CD. I was caught off guard. What am I going to do with my singles and albums collection?
Oh, I still have my turntable and I still play my vinyl.
Yeah.
I do. It's there's something special about the vinyl. That analog sound just had a softness to it that you can really enjoy, whereas the digital era is it's more harsh and sterile. That's what I find.
I like it. I still like it. Think about the RPM. 33 for the LP,
Yeah.
45 for the single.
78, right, would be 15, which is 6.
So it gives... We never thought about these things in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, that's... Who knew about that?
No, we just played our record, We just put the needle down and took a listen.
That's the world we live in.
Yeah.
By the way, Tommy Harriet on his Facebook page has a specific area where he answers questions. It's the same questions that he gets from people. If you go into his Facebook page, you will find it.
Oh, he has like an FAQ page?
Yes, and he says, listen, Memoirs of Billy Shear shares the 2018 edition. Everything in this book is true except chapter 35, I think. Chapter 35 is the chapter where the 6s and the 9s.
Yeah.
So if Tommy Harriet says it on his official Facebook page, I accept it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I figured out a while back was that the fiction in memoirs is defined by what the reader won't accept, what the reader won't believe. So as an example, if you don't believe in the occult, then that's fiction. If you don't believe numbers are meaningful to the elites, that's your fiction. If you don't believe he played Vivian Stanshall from the Bonzos, that's your fiction. That is the primary fictional stream that runs through the book. That's the thread. There's other little bits and pieces, like one part is kind of funny. Billy's talking about the song Don't Pass Me By, and then he has one sentence that says, and George played a mean fiddle on the track. Well, George Harrison doesn't play fiddle, right? So that's an obvious fictional aspect, right? So it's things like that. But the majority of how the book is defined as fiction is what people will not believe, what they won't accept, what they refuse to understand. And so therefore, it's fiction. Isn't that crazy?
That's...
Think about how brilliant that was.
That's his defense. I mean, the story is so crazy, most people don't believe it.
Exactly.
Okay, I really wanted to thank you for your time and the effort.
Oh, you're welcome, Ofer. This is one of the best interviews I ever did.
Wow.
I'm serious.
Thanks.
Oh, it's great. You ask great questions. These are great questions. These are like in-depth questions that nobody really asks me. It was fabulous. We covered so much ground.
Thank you so much, and I'll be in touch. Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye now.